Hello mga giliw na taga-subaybay. Ito po si Frank mula sa studio ng China Media Group. Sa episode kamakailan ng kanyang palatuntunang pinamagatang The Point sa China Global Television Network, hinimay-himay ni Liu Xin ang mga layunin ng pang-uupat ng mga bansang kanluranin sa isyu ng bulak ng Xinjiang. Ani Liu, nais ng mga bansang kanluranin na hadlaan ang pag-unlad ng industriya ng pagkakapi at siranin ang katatagan ng kabahayan at lipunan sa Xinjiang maging sa buong China. Kaugnay ng di umano'y sa pilitang pagtatrabaho sa Xinjiang, sinipin ni Liu ang mga impormasyong napabaloob sa dalawang dokumento mula sa tanggapan ng Better Cotton Initiative sa Shanghai at Skechers, pandaigdigang kumpanya ng kasuotan pambaa, na nagsasabing patay sa kani-kanilang investigasyon, walang sabilitang pagtatrabaho sa Xinjiang. Kasabay nito, kinapanayam din ni Liu ang dalawang tayuhan may malalim na kaalaman sa nabanggit na isyu, na sina Daniel Dembrio, kilalang Canadian YouTuber na nag-espesyalista sa mga isyu pang-politika, at Max Blumenthal, founder at editor-in-chief ng The Grey Zone, independyente website na nagsasagawa ng mga investigasyong politikal. Tunghayan natin ang mga video ng dalawang panayam na ito.
Much for having me. I have been approached recently by quite a few media outlets, and this is the only one I chose to go on because the message that I had put out was intended for foreign audiences, and I feel like you guys have a pretty good base of foreign watchers.
You have participated in this panel discussion, as I say, part of which has gone viral. What was the panel about, and what main ideas did you talk about? What did you think triggered the huge reaction it has received so far, that even the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs decided to air your piece, or that particular piece of your speech, during its daily presser?
Yeah, it received quite a big response in China, although it was made specifically to speak to the overseas kind of areas where people are kind of being tricked by this propaganda. It was actually kind of coincidental that we had this panel and then the sanctions, the more intense sanctions, happened on Xinjiang afterwards. So I think kind of everything aligned for it to become very popular. So that's one of the reasons it became popular. And the whole concept was around examining and tearing apart some of the claims, talking about what the true intentions are behind the U.S. Pushing this narrative and funding it very generously. And just about kind of, Xinjiang in general. So that went on for, 2.5 hours. And by time it came out, as I said, it came out just in time for the sanctions.
What did you mainly talk about? I mean, that particular monologue you gave, what was the main idea in it?
Well, so the main idea was talking about the nature of the claims, how it doesn't really, a lot of the claims don't really hold up, how they fall apart when you question them with even, remotely logical questions. But also one important thing is that it talked about how you are not able in the West to really question it. The moment you question it, even if you're not convinced one way or the other, people call you a genocide denier. They really discourage you from standing in the middle while you figure this out. I think the same thing happened with the MPs in Canada when they voted on calling the situation in Xinjiang a genocide. They knew that they had to vote that way, that the public had been propagandized into believing this. And, compassion has been weaponized, and everybody's going to kind of fall in line. I think that's a good time to be scared because we've seen this kind of a thing before. Not only in terms of narratives being manufactured, whether it be weapons of mass destruction or other, false flag events, whatever they may be, but the problematic language that was used during that time as well, when George Bush said, you're either with us or against us. You cannot stand in the middle. You either have to be completely on board with us or you're our enemy. And you kind of see the same kind of a thing going on with this. I think that part of it struck home with a lot of people who in the West do want to question this. And that's perhaps why it became popular with some groups overseas as well.
Yeah. Well, you talked about some of the holes, which some of what's being said about Xinjiang, you said that doesn't stand. That is very easy if you look at it from a logical way, it just doesn't add up together. Could you give one or two examples about these allegations
Well, I mean,
in Xinjiang?
Yeah, from a just the perspective of living here in China. So, living here in China, I mean, I know Uyghur people as well. If you just look at the fact that the Uyghur population is outgrowing the Han Chinese population, in part because they were never subject to the one-child policy, the fact that they can enter into universities with lower scores than everybody else, basically an affirmative action kind of a program. Halal foods are prepared for them in the cafeterias at these universities. The script, the Uyghur script is written on all of the cash in China. I mean, this is something we don't even do for our native populations in Canada. So it's not only a matter of, sometimes people point to, well, the biggest star in China is also a Uyghur as well. Some people think those are superficial arguments, but when you look at the whole picture, it really doesn't add up. I don't think to be clear, I don't think the situation is perfect. I think, after 2008, there was a racial profiling issue. There were some Uyghurs who were being refused access to hotels and things like that. And that's something even Chinese media wrote about, saying we shouldn't be doing this. This is wrong. But even aside from that, having their documents checked more in airports and things like that. But the thing is that's a racial profiling issue, and it's wrong. But if the U.S. was going to have an honest question, an honest conversation about this, in terms of pointing at racial profiling issues in China, they wouldn't have a leg to stand on. I mean, this is not something they've even figured out on their own. And arguably, China's handled it better in many ways. If you look at the racial profiling that happened after 9/11, people were targeted in a major way in the U.S. as well. I mean, even if you had brown skin, you were at risk. There was a Sikh man who was killed in a gas station because he was mistaken as a Muslim. Mosques were being burned down. You would also go through increased security checks at the airport. It doesn't mean, this isn't a whataboutism to say then it's okay to racially profile here. I'm just saying that that's something they haven't even figured out. Where China did something different was during the time after that happened, Islamophobia was on the rise, and China came in and started censoring things that were overly Islamophobic. They tried to control this situation. Whereas in the West, they were free to say whatever they want, include spread rumors about people standing on building tops, waiting for the planes to hit buildings, which was completely false, which just kind of made the situation even worse for everybody.
Yeah. Well, in Xinjiang, we also have to remind people, or those who are not familiar with the situation, Xinjiang experienced a lot of terrorist attacks. So the security situation, of course, was much more stringent in that part of the world. And unfortunately, that is just what was necessary in order to, bring safety, bring security back to that place.
This photo that you mentioned not only shows an elderly couple being visited by a free medical clinic and receiving free medical care that I think many of my neighbors in the United States would yearn for. They're surrounded by elderly people. I don't see anyone in the photo who is of childbearing age. And Zentz cites this photo as an example of coercive birth control measures and mass surveillance, which really goes to his own prejudice. It appears that he sees any effort at free health care and government outreach and government poverty alleviation as evil, along with birth control. And we can get into his own personal ideology, but throughout his paper, Adrian Zentz conflates free public health care investments, including the $5 billion that was invested in Xinjiang in 2017, with a policy of genocide. And he omits in articles he cites discussions and statistics about the reduction of maternal and infant mortality rates. Now, if China wanted to commit genocide against the Uyghur population of Xinjiang, then why is it taking these efforts, which have been documented by medical publications like Lancet, to reduce the death rate of mothers and infants at birth? That doesn't really add up or make sense, but Zentz leaves this out of his analysis conveniently.
Yeah. Well, some people would really say, if his research is so shoddy, why he's interviewed on national television in Western countries by the German national television. He's quoted by the BBC. He's used by CNN. He's used by U.S. former high government, officials, and now the Secretary of State also endorses this kind of genocide theory. How is that possible?
It really is a commentary on the sad state of U.S. media and an entire corporate and mainstream media that marches in lockstep. It is very much like a regime media. When someone like Adrian Zenz is put forward by a public relations firm or one of these think tanks in Washington, those who interview him don't question his background. And so it's been left up to us to do that questioning, to look into his background and his lack of academic credentials and the data manipulation that he employs to advance a biased claim and arrive at a conclusion which the U.S. government or hardline elements within it are seeking in order to block diplomacy with China. So he plays a very convenient and important role for a part of the political establishment that seeks escalation with China, and that's why he's been given a free pass. And I can tell you, within the academic world, there's a lot of pressure and censorship and self-censorship. If you speak out about this, you will pay a price. If you speak out about this in media, you'll pay a price. Adrian Zenz personally threatened to sue, to take to court, one of the leading Syria scholars in the United States, Joshua Landis, because he tweeted our article out. He promoted the article on Twitter, and Landis's tweet was erased soon after. I don't know if there was a pressure campaign or not, but it's pretty obvious that people get in hot water for questioning Zenz.
Are you not afraid? Are you not worried or concerned that you might get into order for exposing all of this? Have you received any threats or letters or pressure from anywhere not to do this?
Well, at the Gray Zone, we receive a lot of pressure and threats, legal threats to shut us down. Article I just published about Western media acting as intelligence contractors based on leaked documents was just given its own unique Twitter label by Twitter, claiming that the article may have relied on hacked materials. So there's an obvious campaign to suppress us, but the main consequence that I personally face and that we face at the Gray Zone for questioning this narrative is that we get labeled deniers of genocide, essentially Holocaust deniers, when what we're actually doing is scrutinizing and applying skepticism, rational skepticism, to State Department propaganda, the propaganda our own government is using to drive hostility internationally. And this is a lesson that I learned when I was first entering journalism, and the whole media following the narrative of the Bush State Department, including Congress, on Iraq having weapons of mass destruction. I see the same techniques being applied here to manipulate the media, Congress, and the public, and it's working. So I think it's our job to actually provide some rational skepticism.